Yes, are brands fracking the social web? I get asked this a lot. Yes, but what do you actually do? I know you were at an agency, I know you did that thing, but what do you actually do? What is... and it's almost becoming a bit schizophrenic. It's going, well, it's a bit of product and a bit of marketing and a bit of design and strategy and communications and all sorts of things. Because it's I think they're a lot less clear now than they used to be. So the silos that people are dropped into, the departments and the agencies that people work in, it's a lot less clear what everyone does. It's just that sort of what I've tried to embrace that by trying to do a little bit of everything. Smithery, though, as a word is interesting in the sense it's all it is both the work of and the goods made by a smith. So it's sort of it's the things that you make, but the work that you do. It is a verb and it is a noun. So the work of, for instance, all the stuff I do with clients, made are all the things like artifacts, create as a product to investigate and solve a problem. And the artifact cards are sort of a space between work and play, just thinking about how we use tools to work within the web. You think about the sort of like this really broken up frame of ideas. Ideas are no longer linear and documented, and then for how do you flip the digital world as easily as possible. But it's in this strong working principle that Jen talks about, this make things people want as a better idea now than making people want things. It's sort of like, we have spent so long exploiting the demand that was created initially through the early part of the 20th century, but now we're sort of thinking about how do we go back to creating a different sort of demand? How do we build in media and ideas into the things, in the products and the services for clients and for ourselves as we make them on the way through? And then the third thing I do is a healthy dose of speculation. I think speculation is really important. And just sort of sitting back and thinking. And that comes from Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. He talks about men of speculation, whose trade it is not to do anything, but to observe everything, and who, upon that account, are often capable of combining together the powers of the most distant and dissimilar objects. And so it's about taking lots and lots of the things that you see just by watching and just by observing as broadly as you can and going, what happens if you put this with that? And that's the background for something I want to talk about for the fourth time here at Square, about the sort of like the nature of the internet and how it affects the way that agencies think about ideas and create ideas. So I want to talk about fracking. Does anybody know what fracking is?
Yes.
Yes, do you? Excellent. And you will agree that it's an aggressive, invasive technique for extracting valuable raw materials out of hard-to-reach places. So it's essentially sort of like all this natural gas is trapped in shale rock, and so companies go, it's a really good idea to drill a big hole down to that shale rock and pour in lots of nasty chemicals to break it apart, to frack it, so that the gas floats to the surface, because that is what gas wants to do. And they don't really care about the state of the rock or the state of the land after it, because it's the valuable resource, the commodity that they are after. In our game, in marketing and advertising, media, attention is the most valuable raw material that there is. That is the thing that people have lived off for 60, 70, 80 years, is getting attention for products and services. So if that is the most valuable raw material there is, everyone is geared to getting it through whatever means necessary. So one of the questions I'm wrestling with, I've been wrestling with it 4 times on the Squared course this year, is are brands fracking the social web? Are they treating that attention as something that is just to be got out of the social web, no matter what state they leave the social web in after they've got it? Is it sort of like, is it very short term? Is it too short term? I want to read this. I believe that the future of brand communications lies in finding a way to become part of communities and communicate with them in a way that is shared, participatory and reciprocal. That's just me being a dick 5 years ago. Because now, in hindsight, that sounds really annoying. And you go sort of like, in isolation and sort of like as a one brand only thing, you go, that's an interesting thing for a company to do. But when everybody starts doing it, suddenly the landscape is filled with things that no one really cares about. I have to ask, does anybody work on Scrunch or Fold? We did have someone that worked on it before, and we had a very interesting conversation about that. The question that, the thing that no one has ever said, I wonder if my favourite brand of kitchen has a Twitter stream I can follow. It's not the right thing. As Martin from Leiden puts it, the problem is people don't really care. And yet brands are using the social web. Oh, no, we can make people care about how they fold their toilet paper and tell us about it. Funnily enough, we talked in one of the previous Squared sessions, someone who worked on that campaign was here and said, well, the problem is there is puppy blindness. People see the puppy and they don't see the andrex. So we have to break the puppy blindness. You go, no, that is not the problem. That was the solution from 20 years ago. It was to make people not think about wiping their arse and think about puppies, so that every time they saw puppies, they thought of you, and there was this gentle emotion connection. It is not, the puppy is not the problem. Scrunch or fold is the problem. But it comes down to the fact that perhaps brands and the social web are just two very different types of things. Because of the age and the infrastructure that they were created in, they are just really, really different. I realise my cultural references are about 30 years out of date. So let's think a little about conversations, because at the heart of the social webs that's what it is. It's about people talking around things. So there's a brilliant book by Richard Sennett called Together. It's the second in a trilogy about the skills people need to sustain everyday life. And it's all about cooperation. It's all about an exchange in which the participants benefit from the encounter. Everybody benefits. There's reciprocal value for the taken from everything. And it contains a very useful way to think about conversation. So when we speak about communication skills, we focus on how to make a clear presentation to present what we think or feel, which in essence is the brand approach. It's all me. Me. What do I think? I'm presenting myself to you. I don't really care what the answer is. Whereas conversation is about listening. And more important than just listening is listening well. And then it goes on to say, listening carefully produces conversations of two sorts, the dialectic and the dialogic. I worked in media, for fuck's sake. But with investigation, you read the book and then you start digging around the internet and you see what this begins to mean. It's all like what he's talking about is dialectic. Specifically, he references the work of Hegel. It's the interaction and resolution between multiple ideas. The aim is to come to a common understanding. It's one answer. It's consensus. It wants consensus. It doesn't really matter how good that consensus is, though. It's just something that gets everyone to one answer that everyone's behind and everyone agrees with to put out there. And you can see why a lot of brands are dialectic because of the way the media infrastructure worked. It was kind of like, we have to put one thing on a poster. We have to put one thing in a TV ad. We have to put one thing here. So we all have to create a consensical brand where the answer is one thing, because that's the way the media industry works. Dialogic conversation comes from back. It's a discussion that does not resolve itself by finding common ground. I really like this, not just from the point of view that Backton looks a lot more fun to go out for a pint with. He looks like one of those mental Russians. And indeed he might well have been. People become more aware of their own views and expand their understanding of one another. In a dialogic conversation, ideologies coexist. They constantly interact and inform each other. And each ideology can hold more salience in certain circumstances. The crucial bit is if the circumstances change, you can change your mind. You can change the thing that you use. It is no longer about right or wrong, but just about appropriate. What is the most appropriate thing within the sort of this construct? It gives you a toolbox. You can be a mental mercenary around what it is that is most appropriate to use at any given time. So after reading this and wrestling with it for a while, it began to see this might not just apply to conversation. So this interplay of ideas is very reminiscent of the way the social web works. The social web is not consensus. It is dialogic in its nature. But what if there are dialectic and dialogic structures and cultures too? So traditional marketing is more likely to be dialectic. And social web platforms and companies are much more dialogic. Certainly explains the culture clash between the two. So, are brands intentionally fracking the social web? Well, perhaps. But it might just be the fault of a massive cultural divide. Talking of massive cultural divides, I talked this summer at the Folksy Summer School. So Folksy, for those of you who don't know what art is, it's basically the British Etsy. So it's very talented designer makers who make things and sell them on this website. So it takes, if you imagine the sort of like the craft fair at Whitstable, it takes the most talented people out of that and gives them a global marketplace on which to sell their wares. And I was invited up there to say sort of like, can you tell us about brand? How do we go about building brands? Which is a strange thing, because they were almost going sort of like, oh, we've been told that this is the thing we should aim for, to be a brand, to be sort of like consistent and have a view and have one thing we're about. But I didn't think that was quite right, so I asked them to listen. What's that? There's someone working with metal and a hammer, and what you're hearing is the constant choices and decisions and intent, but none of it's consistent. It's not like a machine. It's not da-dunk, 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 da-dunk. It's a tone of action. It's a repeating sound of good workmanship. So rather than be the thing that is punched out by the machine, it is the thing that sort of like represents someone in there, people in that place, making constant decisions about what it is would be good. So we talked, when we were up at the folksy thing, about Stradivarius. So Stradivarius, Antonio Stradivari, made the best stringed instruments in Europe. And he wasn't one of these poor people that sort of like was only lauded after his time. He did really well. All the princes and kings and queens and princesses of Europe demanded his stringed instruments over anyone else. So his company, his brand was huge. It was really strong. He made a fortune. But of course, this is in the days before mass media, so how do you continue a brand? And you've only got to continue it through the people that work there. And he gave it the best shot that he could, because they were only 2 sons, and neither of them ever married, and they only ever worked with their father in his workshop. And so from the age of 8, they were there, around his work, seeing everything he did, from the same genetic stock. And he thought, if there was ever a way to continue a brand, to continue a company, a legacy, that's the way to do it. But it didn't work, because he could not teach them how to be geniuses. So someone very delightfully disparagingly referred to things, I've played their violins and they are merely excellent. They just didn't achieve the same thing. So the business folded in 20 years after Stradivari's death. But founder brands are really interesting. A lot of the brands that you work on now will still bear the founder's name, will still bear the Ford or the Kellogg's or whatever else. It's still a sort of like, how have they extended that thing? How have they taken these sort of like all the ideas and the things that they did in the ethos and exploited the demand that they initially created? Brands helped a lot. Brands were designed to fit the landscape. It's like we can sort of like compress everything down into one simple thing and make the whole business about that. So if the guy dies, it doesn't really matter, because we can still put that one simple thing, because that's how media is structured. Of course, the landscape's changing. I don't know why that whenever I draw the internet, it's this sort of like weird, smiley, fuzzy ball of energy, but it seems appropriate. The landscape is changing, and a lot of this brand thinking is outdated by the internet. And so when I was talking to the people at Folksy, we referenced together again and talked about dialectic and dialogic, and it's suddenly, in the context of this, traditional branding seems really hard. It seems sort of like, what do you choose? What's the right thing? How do you make something? Whereas before it was all about compression, it's not about that anymore. It's about all these different choices. And you don't know. Uncertainty and inconsistency. These are not welcomed words in traditional agencies or marketing departments, because it sounds wrong. It sounds like this is the wrong thing to aim for. I think one perfect demonstration of this is, who's ever wrestled with, or been in a room where people are wrestling with this question? What's our brand's tone of voice? Rupert Wegereff's doing some really interesting research on the dialogic effect on education. And he talks about the internet being a dialogic space that supports the interplay of billions of voices. Why would you choose one? Why would you simply choose one voice if the internet is not like the interplay of billions of different voices? And to be fair, the one you choose as a brand's tone of voice will be pretty monotonous, because what you're trying to do is compress it into something that appeals to everyone, but by doing such, you'd appeal to nobody. So I've been thinking that it's not about maintaining this tone of voice, it is about demonstrating a tone of action. The tone of action is the thing that attracts people, the way in which you do things, not the things that you say. things that sort of like people look to you and go sort of like, I don't know what's going to happen next. It is the uncertainty and inconsistency that makes me think of Red Bull on Nike. That is appealing. I want to be part of something where I don't know what's going to happen next, not where I am utterly sure and certain of it. And it's not just one action, it's all of them. It's everything you do becomes part of the sort of like the bigger entity. There's an economic theory called the labour theory of brand value, and it was started by Adam Smith and continued by Karl Marx. So pleases both sides of the political spectrum. And whereas modern economics says that the value of things is determined by what one is willing to give up to obtain them, basically what you can persuade people to pay for something is how much it's worth. The labour theory of value states that the value of something is determined by the labour that went into its production. How much you paid the person to make it, how much the materials cost, and then sort of like enough money to make the business sustainable over a long time so that you can keep doing it if the thing is valuable to society. And that's how you set price in the labour theory of value. You say, look, it took us all this to make it, so therefore you must pay this. Not more, not less, just this. And that's preposterous in modern economics. But perhaps the internet allows us to think about a labour theory of brand value. Does anybody know about Field Notes? So Field Notes is an American stationery brand. And they've been going for about 5-6 years now. And they're really interesting because they make notepads. But they make really expensive notepads. It's sort of like over 3 times as much as what you'd pay for a little A6 notepad in Ryman's. And you go, why do people buy these? What's the appeal? Sort of like, how can you demonstrate that you're worth that much more? My friend Toby sort of referred to marketing as world building. We can show you the world. And what they do is quarterly, they do a seasonal special. And they really go to town on it. And they demonstrate everything they're doing, the paper they're using, the theme for it, how they've designed it, who they talk to about it, where the idea initially came from. And every quarter they have a phenomenal amount of sort of like storytelling around one special edition that will be gone in 3 months. And economically that would not make sense. But as a collective whole, it rises the whole business. Everyone believes it sort of, if you go to the extent of making all that and that and that and that, then everything you do must be worth more. It's everything that made it happen on top of the product. It's layered on in the granular form. It's not about thinking about it and sort of like, okay, so what's the one thing that we can do? So like, show everyone everything. The labour theory of brand value, if it holds, I think, is that you have to make everything with the infinite canvas of the internet in mind. The internet doesn't like compression. It finds it boring. People sort of very quickly run away from it, etc. But we'd rather buy into this world if we buy into it than that one, a really flat, homogeneous world. And I think brands find this hard because of what I think of as the hollow factory. So if you imagine there are 2 opposite forces of innovation at play in most established companies. And innovation in sort of like the pure sense, the Motorola Six Sigma sense, is about making product very efficiently. How do I ship this thing for less? How do I sort of like work out a clever way to devise to make the thing smaller, tighter, easier to source, quicker to get through the machines? How do I extract cost and pain out of the process? Whereas marketing innovation is all about making stuff as interesting as possible. How do I attract attention? How do I get the internet to recognise and recommend that there are things within this product, service, which are worth paying attention to and worth talking about? And the 2 are opposing forces. Because it's sort of like the more effectively and efficiently and cleanly you make a thing, the less interesting and granular and story-worthy it becomes. So you have 2 battling forces within this of marketing innovation going, we could do this, and people going, well, we're not going to do that to the product because the machine is set up and it runs at this, and it gets out for 30p a unit, so we're not going to change that because that's just cost. So I think that sort of, there is a lot of thinking to be done in company structure around sort of like, where does marketing start? So I think Marx was half right. It's not about the means of production though, it's not about the tools with which that people are coming to grab and seize. It's about the meaning in production. It's about the way in which we do things. The way we bring this thing to you is what people are seizing from large companies and large brands by making people care about commodities, everything from coffee to chocolate to knives or whatever else. People on an individual level can make people care because it's easier to create meaning in production in the social web if you go about it that way. But if we want to do it for small, big, medium-sized, large brands, it demands dramatic changes in how we work. So whereas this is all about competition, simplicity, compression, certainty, I would argue this is all about cooperation, complexity, fragmentation and experimentation. And I'll just go through each of those four just to sort of bring out some examples of what I think that means and some ways in which you might approach it. So they break down into a nice 4-box as well. I'll never love a 4-box. And there's also a folksy version. So rather than doing the sort of it's complexity, cooperation, fragmentation and experimentation, you can just say, well, it's just projects, people, past and future. So the first one's fragmentation. It's embracing the granularity of everything you've ever done. So Thomas Heatherwick, who's designed many brilliant things from the Olympic Cause and Torch to the new Routemaster bus, talks about he's really interested in the making of it, where the making is part of the story of the it. So everything you do on the way through is story. It becomes part of the thing. The way that you make it becomes part of the thing, not just the thing at the end. And there's interesting things and sort of ways of doing that. If you're a company with lots of history, a brand that's been around for ages, it can be blending everything you do with a rich tapestry of your past. So Burberry are excellent at this, I think. So every time they feel that there's the danger of it dropping off in social media because they've not got enough stories to tell, they will lump in magazine shots from 1967. The Art of the Trench, tracking the history of the sort of that trench coat over however many years, etc. They realise that sort of everything they've ever done has led them to the point they're at now and is therefore relevant in this world. It's not like sort of oh, we did this campaign, but that's not us anymore, so we can never see it again. It all took you to where you are, so you might as well use it because the internet will not get bored with content. If you're more modern than that, it can be a granular version of sort of showing everyone everything you do to make their thing. So I'm really fascinated by sort of companies like Cut Brooklyn, which make kitchen knives. They're just kitchen knives, but the way they tell the story about everything that goes into that knife, the materials and the way they do it and how they use them and so on, just demonstrates very ably the sort of the things that you have to, the things that you can do, the way that you can make story interesting and the way through making stuff. The second thing is cooperation. It's about people. As a one-sentence statement, there's a whole book behind this, but the title's right. Organisations don't tweet, people do. I don't understand how I could be friends with McDonald's. That's weird. But I can understand how I can be friends with people at McDonald's if I'm really interested in the environmental stuff that we're doing, or the sourcing stuff that we're doing, or the kids stuff that we're doing, and having people in those organisations and structures. People like people, people buy people. There's a side benefit to this as well. The engine of knowledge creation is articulation. So it's a continuous process of making knowledge explicit and relevant to the task at hand. So this comes from some dialogic thinking and organisational theory, which talks about sort of the more people talk about things within organisations, the easier it is for organisations to do things. The knowledge spreads quicker, faster. And if you don't have that constrained in email systems, but you do some of that openly, that makes it easier for people to go sort of, oh right, so that guy marketing who wants on Twitter, they sort of has found lots of success with people talking about that over that. We should go and talk to them as well because we need to do something. So you break down those walls around an organisation and let the people around it interact with the people inside, and that helps knowledge spread around an organisation faster. It brings into question sort of the way that a lot of brands are structured nowadays. Because having a lot of people in our company makes that easy. So if you're a supermarket now, it's really easy to sort of to just go, hey, we should get people tweeting and sort of let people be someone from Sainsbury's, someone from Tesco's, because people know that you have people on the ground all across the world, all across the country, all across the thing. So when you say Sainsbury's, you go, all right, so they do this thing with kids in my school, or they do this thing at sort of local level to support a football team, or they do this thing at regional level where they get all their meat from Herefordshire, or they get it sort of scales up. There are lots of places that you understand where people, Sainsbury's are full of people. If you've constructed your brands in a way where it's sort of people don't know who you are, people don't think that Unilever or P&G or Nestle or whatever else our organisations are full of people. I think this approach is harder for them. And it's interesting to look at stuff like, so P&G's proud supporters of mums is almost a surfacing of sort of hey look, we are people. We are trying to get into a space where we can have that conversation because there's a bigger thing behind these really shallow brands. Because most of the brands that these guys have are really shallow things which don't live well on the internet. So I think that sort of like, we will see more changes in the way that people structure between that sort of like parent company and just sort of like supermarket premium brand stuff. Because people buy people. Sort of like at the heart of it, sort of like people trust that sort of like people aren't nasty, but organisations can be. People sort of like are more believable. 100% of people in your business are building brands, but it's not just about people in your business. It's about suppliers, customers, friends, etc. You go, all these people are helping build my brand. So how do I become as human as possible to make the most of that if I'm going to play in this space? Third thing, complexity. I used to work in a motor brand, which had one of these systems in which, let's say, right, we're launching a new car across the world, so we will sort of have a global pitch, and one agency will win the pitch, and then that will be the creative that rolls out along the world. So the consolidate, I'm going to save money by having just one bit of creative that rolls around the world. And so we were sitting there, and it was for this creative arrived for the new car, and it was an American agency that had won the pitch, and all the creative was sitting there was about Sunset Boulevard. And we're going, this doesn't mean anything in Britain. There's no cultural resonance of Sunset Boulevard in Britain. It's sort of like, it just doesn't work. It's not going to fire anything. And they're going, no, but we've made it now. We can't make anything else. But by consolidation and trying to save money by thinking, hey, the world's a global place now, etc. What you're doing is sort of like you're not creating a brand platform that helps local markets win. You're creating a brand platform that sort of like pretty much guarantees defeat. I think it's all like that thing about it. It's not about consolidation. It's about thinking about sort of like brands like that as an operating system upon which people can build things. And you let them go and build things. And then you sort of like work out how to cross-populate stuff across the world. I think Coke are really good at that, for example, as an example. They go sort of like, let's just build happiness as an operating platform. People can do things on top of that. And then if stuff works in one territory, then we'll share it and we can port it across another territory, see if it will work there. But we give the local markets choice in what works, as opposed to just top-down global brand nonsense. Think about it another way. There is no one-size-fits-all in YouTube. So the way Nike use the new YouTube channel, they don't try and ramp everyone's attention through one big Nike channel. If you like baseball, you go and see the baseball stuff. If you like basketball, you see the basketball stuff. We're not going to bother you with the elite runner stuff because we know you don't care. And yet, to everyone, hey, you want to see everything from this brand. No, don't try and consolidate. Try and find the niches and the way to serve those niches. And I think with the right mechanic, complexity becomes an amazingly compelling thing. Does anyone know about Small Business Saturday? So it's now arriving here. And it's been running in the States for about 5 years now, maybe? And so it's essentially, American Express said, if you spend on this day in a small store, we will give you 25% back on your car. If you use your American Express, we'll give you 25% back. Just for this one day, Small Business Saturday, shop local. But the way they did that was sort of, then they created a kit of parts for any retailer who wanted to take part, any small shop, and they said, there you go, there's some stuff, go and make a campaign. We don't want to see it, we don't want to check it, just, there you go, it's a platform. You can build on top of that. And people went, oh brilliant, you've given me just enough to be part of something bigger, but to do it in my own way. And that's not even inside their own company, that's sort of like to anyone who has an American Express thing on their till. And it's phenomenally successful in America, so that I think it was about the third year into the campaign, they got it officially legislated by Congress as an official day. Small Business Saturday is in the American Constitution or something. It's brilliant. And when I was talking to the folksy people, it's just sort of like, it's about sort of projects and portfolios. It's not about being about one thing and just making one thing and being consistently. It's about sort of like projects and portfolios show your strength and depth. The variety of stuff that is done with your name on it or behind it or underneath it demonstrates a tone of action. It demonstrates that sort of like you're more interesting than that one shallow thing. The final thing is experimentation. So you show people the future you want to live in with them. Whether it's sort of like going to space and jumping into things or building weird sort of like sci-fi goggle things. I really like them though. Or building fuel bands. Fuel bands aren't really there for everyone to wear a fuel band, but they're there to show you the sort of like what Nike want things to be like. What they think is interesting, sort of like how you can use this sort of like playful data along with exercise and along with sort of like everyone being an athlete. Or Samsung's Windows. I'll just sort of we can sort of create very gentle background versions of the interfaces we see now, but in everyday objects. And it's really easy to do this if you're sort of like, you've got massive budget or you're a big tech brand. But every market has a future. So it's just about sort of like whatever market you're operating in, you go, what is the future I want people to live in, and how do I show them and bring them into that? So this is an example from fast food. Even fast food has a future.
Just guessing at numbers and figures, pulling the puzzle apart. Questions of science, science and progress don't speak as loud as my heart. Nobody said it was easy. It's such a shame for us to part. Nobody said it was easy. No one ever said it would be so hard. I'm going back to the start.
So that's from, does people know Chipotle? And that's a couple of years old now, and they've got a subsequent film out called The Scarecrow with a game behind it that sort of like takes people through exactly thinking about sourcing of where stuff comes from. And they're really sort of like being disruptive in that market. And so like, it doesn't have to be like this. We don't have to have just the lowest common denominator meat pumped full of drugs and pills. But we want to lead that discussion and work out a way to help the farmers who produce this stuff to find a market for sort of like meat done well, produce done well. And I think that's a very brave thing to do, but it's paying massive dividends for them. It's about a journey of intent. It's about sort of like showing people, this is where we want to go, but we can't get there without you. Do you want to be part of this thing? It's a bigger thing. You might not know what happens next. It's not research and development, but persistence of vision. It's like, look, we know there's something in this, help us find it. And a lot of that stuff has to be open development. And it has to be working with people. And the internet responds well in the right way, in the right pockets to this stuff. This all sounds amazing, but there's a catch. You have to give up something for each of these. So if you want to embrace fragmentation, if you're thinking about sort of, how do I tell all these granular stories with the same constraints, with the same market, you have to give up perfectionism. The trade is almost this, like you have to make things that are sort of like, that are perfectly acceptable on the internet. If kids in bedrooms can make it at that quality and it be appreciated, you probably can too. But it's what you swap for that sort of that speed of delivery of content. That's the way to win it. Just like, don't try and make everything like sort of like £100,000 production. Go sort of like, how can I make something and get it up? Being up and out is better than being perfect. To embrace cooperation, this is, everyone knows this. You give up control, you swap it for community. You can't do top-down control and get that cooperation working. To embrace complexity, I'll share all this stuff. Write it down exactly. To embrace complexity, give up consolidation. Don't try and save money at the front end and go, there we go, we can sort of be quite happy that sort of we've only paid this for our sort of like global advertising, it's not going to work. But what you can swap it for is speed. You've got speed of reaction time, sort of like the ability to react to things. This real-time marketing is quite a buzzy phrase at the moment, but there's something powerful at the heart of it. And to embrace experimentation, this is the hardest thing. You've got to give up saying, I know, because you don't know. We don't know. But you can learn. But the only way you learn is by putting stuff out there. Mikey Kruger of Instagram's got a great encapsulation of this. A day in the wild is worth a month of guessing. Just having it out there and seeing how people react will save you so much time and energy and effort sitting in white-walled rooms trying to imagine what's going to happen, because then it just becomes a battle of reckons. I reckon this is going to happen. Well, I reckon this is going to happen. Nobody knows, so don't have the battle of reckons. I think we've got to learn, think and thrive in the context of working with multiple perspectives and ultimate uncertainty, says Rupert Wegerath, from the educational point of view. And I think that is a lesson that we can port all across the dialogic understanding of the internet and what it does for every industry. If you want to read more on this, I recently did a thing with Contagious, where we set out the dialogic argument, and then we got sort of like people like Martin Weigel and Mark Earls and Sarah Watson and Marcus to respond, and just sort of like, so what else do you see? Because the very notion of dialogic means that sort of like, this isn't the right answer. This is not the right answer for every brand, but there are sort of like, it just means that there are many things that are true at any one moment in time. So this gives even more sort of like depth and perspective to give you a broader toolbox to pick from whenever the most appropriate stuff comes up. But the one thing I'd like to leave you with is sort of like your brand has a certain tone of action, not a tone of certain action. Thank you.